Kia ora koutou. Thank you so much for coming this afternoon. My name is Chelse Nicholls. I am the senior curator here at the Dowse, and I'm so excited to introduce you to Angela Singer. Angela Singer is, she's British-born but New Zealand-based artist who's been based in Wellington and now Carterton. She's shown all over the world, Paris, London, LA, and now here in Lower Hutt. So we're very lucky to have her here today. So Angela works across quite a lot of medium, but she's probably best known for her work with Forsaken Taxidermy. And so today we are really excited to give you an introduction to her show and some of the works that she does and a bit of an overview of Angela's practice. So please join me in welcoming Angela Singer. I thought we'd start, Angela, by talking about Deadeyed series. So the show is, of course, called Second Sight. So I wondered if you wanted to start with talking about what Deadeyed is to you, or what Second Sight is to you.
Well, if I think of the Deadeyed series, I've been making it for a number of years, and it really came about from me thinking about, with taxidermy, one of the things that makes taxidermy look live is the eyes, and if the eyes are wrong, then it really doesn't look like it's a living animal on the wall. And so looking at vintage taxidermy in people's homes, which this was in the mid-90s, I found it quite disturbing to be finding representations and presentations of animal skins in people's homes as decoration. I just found it far more widespread in New Zealand than in the UK and in Australia. And so I thought I really want to make some works around the eyes and changing the eyes so that they actually look like the animal would have looked when it died. And so this is the latest work in that series, and I've changed the eyes to a cloudy white-blue eye, which I've made from porcelain. And this is from a description. I haven't seen an actual dead deer lying on the ground, but the hunters who have donated taxidermy to me have told me that there is a clouding with a whiteness with a blue, and so this was my imagination of what that eye might look like if it was dead.
So that's quite a good point, is that most of your taxidermy comes from people donating it to you. So can you tell us the story about where this very majestic stag, which one of our installers has started to worship semi-regularly?
So this one is from an ex-hunter in Canterbury, and he shipped that up to me a few years ago. And so I used to advertise, when I lived in Hawke's Bay, I'd have a running ad in the local trader magazine for any damaged or old taxidermy that people didn't want. And I found that ex-hunters were prepared to give me that taxidermy. And then they would tell me about how they were no longer hunting, and then they'd start telling the story of how they killed the animal. And so I said, well, would it be right if I recorded that? And so I kept this record of the death of the animal, the hunting of the animal, and I've tried to work that over the years into how the animal looks to give an idea of perhaps how it did come to die. So this work is called Immortal, and an Immortal is, you still see them around in some of the older grave sites. On a grave, it's a glass dome with everlasting flowers in it. And the flowers are usually Italian Capodimonte. They're flowers made in the Capodimonte region of Italy for, more than 100 years. And nowadays, they're mainly sold to go in the home and, to be placed on the doily and to be decorative. So I thought I would make one for this deer because it's kind of its own grave site here. And so at the base, I've got old Capodimonte flowers from the op shops. New, they're quite expensive, but in op shops, they're pretty cheap. And then I've made a series of shapes out of white porcelain, and they go upwards. And you'll see at the very top, it's like a finger, like a tentacle pointing. Now that's referencing memento mori, the tradition in paintings where you have a skeleton. They're pointing and they're reminding you of your mortality, and so it's pointing upwards to the deer at the very top there.
And one of my favorite details about this, and again, you're going to have to come really close because it took me a while to notice these, is that there are little teeth.
So there's human teeth, but also some deer teeth within the flowers that I've made. And
Your human teeth?
no, then no. A dentist in Hawke's Bay collects teeth that he pulls, usually from root canals, and so that's where the teeth are from. The deer teeth are out of some of the old taxidermy deers. They're basically, some of them are falling apart, so I collect those. And I've included those to reference the fact that this particular Immortal is about the human-animal relationship and what survives death. And one of the things that you can find when somebody decomposes is their teeth.
So it's part of the reason of using human teeth among these animal parts is to really make us think about our own
Mortality.
death and mortality with this as well?
Yeah, and the fact that we are animals and we don't like to think about that. I think it's a very troubled, complicated relationship at this time that we do have with animals. So this little vintage taxidermy fawn, it's called Still, and it's called Still because it was a stillborn fawn that was, the hunter had killed the mother and cut it out and taxidermied it. So the jewels and the ceramic pieces there, which are like vines that are going through the little body. The idea with this one is I was thinking about when it was cut out of the mother's stomach and then put on the grass amongst the flowers, amongst all the leaves, and kind of imagining what that would have looked like, and then trying to create a representation of that. And then the dead eyes, I've got them protruding because there was nothing lifelike about the little fawn. It never lived. So that's the idea with particularly green eyes as well. Just very, very unnatural.
I've heard you use the word de-taxidermy to describe your practices.
I call it de-taxidermy because I'm taking the taxidermist's work and then I'm trying to turn the taxidermic meaning, because quite often taxidermy is about being a trophy. It's about dominance and power, and that's why it's up on somebody's wall, because they've killed the animal. And so by de-taxidermy, I guess I mean, let's have a look at where the scars are. That's I'm peeling back and I'm looking at the fur and I'm seeing bullet holes, I'm seeing stitching, and I want to expose that, and I want to show not only the taxidermic process, but also the history of the animal, because why is the taxidermist covering up these marks?
I think a work like this really strikes me because I think there's something really beautiful and almost, it's quite compelling, it's a little bit whimsical, and then you start to kind of unpack these layers and you see it's this very heavy, very dark story. Is that a purposeful strategy that you use to try and sort of draw people into the stories of these animals?
It is, and using the jewels and the flowers, there's definitely a push-pull element to that. It's like you're attracted to the jewels, but then you might be a bit repulsed by the eyes or the body. And so it's kind of a beauty and horror combination. So these works are, because I source a lot of materials from opportunity shops, I was finding in the shops that I was seeing quite a few kits of very kitsch cats and dogs in particular. And I wanted to use them in a way that better represented in my mind perhaps our relationship with animals, or the strangeness of some of the kit sets. So some of these kit sets, you find them partly done, some are not done, and so you have to stitch them yourself. And so with this one, it's called Stalks, and for me that's a cat sitting in a window looking at birds. The revenge one down here is the lovebirds attacking a cat, and that one's called Avery. The one at the top there is called a fairy presence, and that's a ghost cat amongst cats at night, which is, I don't know if you've ever had that experience where you've had a pet die and at night time you hear the door go, or you hear a creak and it's like, ooh, what's that? And the one down the bottom is laser beam cat, which is another cat watching birds. And I feel like with these kits, they're very sentimental, and you never really see a kit that shows how animals act in their natural state. You don't see a kit which is a cat attacking a bird, or a cat fight, or a dog attacking a cat, or any of those things that are part of owning a pet.
I think that brings up a really interesting thread that goes through your practice, which is that idea of naturalism, or the way that we have particular ways we think about animals. And I think with the taxidermy in particular, and that act of taxidermy, trying to freeze something in life, but of course it's not lifelike at all. That sort of dysfunction between the way that we see what animals actually are and the way that we'd like them to be and the way we represent them. I think the other thing that strikes me about this work is it also comes back to those themes of death that you explore with things like Immortal. Because I always think of these kit sets that you're finding sort of half-finished in op shops, they're also speaking to sort of human death or someone not finishing something. Is that meant to be, again, putting us as the animal and us as a mortal creature as well? Is that something that you see as part of these works? Or is that just me being really dark?
I think it's part of all the materials that I get from op shops, because a lot of it is from deceased estates. So the Capodimonte, even the wax candles that I use in the waxworks. A lot of, even, some of the taxidermy I get donated is because somebody died and left their taxidermy collection to a member of a family who did not want that, and so they are prepared to give it to me.
I think that's really interesting, especially because I've also heard you describe your work as thinking about another ending for these animals as well. But in a way, you're also finding other endings for these people's collections as well. So are those two things important throughout your practice?
It is really important that, there's an environmental element to reusing and not throwing away. And that's, I think, really, really important for the materials that I use, because I really don't like buying new. I don't like buying new for clothes, for anything.
That's an interesting tension with you as a maker who has this urge to be making things but not wanting to sort of add to the scourge of things.
Well, this is it, and it also limits what I can make, because if that's the way I want to work, then I can't go buy a whole bunch of new stuff, or I can't go commission something. Tia actually came out of not wanting to waste the leftovers from the old taxidermy that I was de-taxiderming. So people would donate things that were really falling apart, and what might be left was some eyes, or some teeth, or even just all the foam or the filling that's actually inside the animal skin. And so I thought, well, I think I'd like to use that to make some animal forms and to imagine some animal shapes, almost thinking about what was inside the animal before it was taxidermied, the flesh, and to make my own fleshy forms out of wax.
None of these are actually based on particular parts, but they're all sort of imagined. They're meant to sort of evoke animal parts rather than sort of being modeled on specific ones. Is that right?
Yeah, there's some that do look more kind of realistic. Like a little head up there could be like a deer's head, but none of them are meant to be.
And thinking about that idea of waste, what this work really says to me, it's about those bits of animals that are kind of not acceptable usually to display, like say in a home, the way that a pelt or a fur or a stag's head might be, but all those sort of the inside bits. And it's that line again about where we decide what's acceptable to sort of stuff and put on your wall and what isn't, like where our line of the grotesque, I suppose, sits with animals.
Yeah, there's, if you think about what's inside a taxidermic animal, then it's usually foam. But sometimes if they're really old, I've pulled out all kinds of things. Just people have stuffed, just put junk in there. And so
what's the weirdest thing you've ever found in one?
A newspaper from like the late 1800s. And it's still a bit of, so you could still read a bit of it. There was a pair of men's pants inside one, a long pair of pants.
Did you try them on?
No, they were a bit dusty.
So you started this work in 2005, that's right, and you add to it bits over time. And so how many did it start with, and where are you at with it now?
It started with 4 pieces. There'd be over 200 pieces now, and I'm still making them, and I'll, usually I'll get an eye. That's usually what sparks me to make another piece, is thinking about how I'll use it.
Well, one of the things I was really excited about showing it here before was that this has been shown kind of all over the world. This is possibly one of your best known pieces, but it's never actually been shown here in Aotearoa before, is that right?
That's right, it's well travelled.
So I've seen it displayed as well in cases in a natural history museum that was in Paris.
Yeah, so they had it so you look down on it, and so that was quite interesting because it was almost displayed like it was some strange artifact that had been uncovered, because throughout the museum that's how the artifacts are displayed. So I think that changes the context of how you view it and how you react to it, because it was treated very, very precious.
Do you think that context of being in a natural history museum also added a different kind of layer versus seeing it in a more art context like this?
It did, because there was for some people that they did think that this was animal, like it was an animal material, and it kind of is, in that there is some beeswax candles within that, but there's no flesh.
And this work, do you find that people react to it more viscerally than other works? Which this doesn't actually have any animal parts in it, but it seems to me to be the one that has the most potential to make you go, ugh.
Yes, the red works, they have been mistaken as having blood or being wet with blood. I don't see it myself, but that has been a problem.
Yeah.
For the art galleries, not for me.
Do you think you could point out a few of your favorite bits and talk about them as well? You must have favorites.
I think that one of the favourites is this particular eye here, because this ended up looking like it was a mouth, and it looks particularly not evil, but a bit creepy. I like this one here. I started out making it as a snout kind of thing, but it ended up looking like a fist, so it's a fist snout, which is a bit weird. And I quite like the little tiny tongues. I made these back in 2015, and then I made quite a few of them so they could be, kind of covering the wall. And I particularly like this snout, which has a third breathing hole here, so it's some kind of mutant snout. But it's been displayed in so many different ways, and for this show, I thought the green would be a great contrast. It would also make it perhaps a bit more playful, so that if people were really creeped out by any of it, it would be less so.
Well, I think that word playful is really interesting in the context of your work, which has these very dark themes, and a lot of them, if you start to scratch the surface, there's some very, very heavy content. And one of the things I'd be really interested to talk to you about is the way that little people react to your work versus the grown-ups who might get more of that subtext.
Kids seem to really love it, which is great. That's wonderful, because obviously I would like kids to be thinking about their relationship with animals, and particularly their pets. When we were installing, and so there was a couple of kids that came in and they went through to the new family area there, and one of the little boys came out and the deer head had just been hung, and his mate said, "Look at its eyes," and and he turned to his friend and just said, "Yeah, it's dead." And I thought, and that's right.
Let's talk about some of your ceramics, which I think is perhaps less well-known part of your practice. I think you're probably best known for your taxidermy and embroidery bits, but I love these.
So I haven't been working with ceramic for years, and recently bought a kiln, and that's really one of the things that's held it back, is being able to fire and glaze my own ceramics. And so it was like, great, now I can get back to that as well. So these are ghost cats, and they really are for me, about dead pets. And the green one is green because I kind of feel like that's, when people lose their cat and you never find out what happened to your cat, and then somebody will say, oh, there was a cat and it was on the side of the road on the grass verge. And to me, that is every cat that nobody ever got back. Never knew what happened to it. The fat cat is about ghostly forms. You know, they have no substance. They're kind of hollow inside, or that's what we're told, and you see through them. And the fat cat is giving it this big amount of substance, and and also, you know, our cat was quite overfed and was very fat, so it's probably about that too. Although that was the neighbours, they fed it lasagna.
It's Garfield.
And the smaller, leaning back ghost cat is to me, it's just that I think I was saying before, you know, ghostly experiences with your pets, and to me that one's it. It's kind of frightening, but it's also like, oh, you're back, you're lovely.
Aww.
When people take from the work, you know, that I have a deep love for animals, and also, you know, it connects with their own love of animals, then, you know, that's perfect.
And you have a cat as well?
I have a cat that is not allowing us to have more pets at this time, or to have other animals as part of our animal family. So we have to work on her, because yeah, she's a one cat, one family cat.
What does this princess cat think of all of these taxidermied animals that you work with?
She's very interested in looking at them. I try and keep the taxidermy cats away from her, so she's not freaked out. But everything else she's really into.
But you've never taxidermied an animal yourself,
No.
so this is not the fate of what will happen.
No, I only use vintage taxidermy, never ever taxidermied an animal at all.
And what do you think about, you know, there's been quite a trend in recent years of sort of taxidermies come back into fashion in particular circles. How has that sort of landed with you? How have you felt about that?
On the one hand, I think it's this desire to be closer to nature. We are quite removed from it, and I think that's, you know, that was the popularity in the Victorian times, this wanting to bring nature into your home. On the other hand, I really, really hope that it is roadkill taxidermy, and that people are not killing animals to meet orders.
I think that there is an aspect of what you're saying is that people are unpacking their relationship with animals and unpacking their relationship with death as well, which is something of a taboo subject, or has been. And that's something that your work, you know, since the 90s has really, you've looked straight into the eyes of death and our relationship to it.
It is, and I think younger people are more open to that. I think that's why I think it's more younger people who do want taxidermy in their homes. The older people with taxidermy, that tends to be people who have actually gone out and killed an animal and turned it into a trophy.
And trophy is an interesting word, because trophy is something I've heard you talk a lot about, and this idea, there's like a dominance with when you use the word trophy, or like trophy hunting, and that feels quite different than what the trend of contemporary taxidermy has become. Do you think that that's true, or do you think it's still about trophying?
It's still about dominance. It's still about using the animal in some way.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm using animal parts, discarded, but I'm still using them in my art. And yeah, it's still about how you will use it. Will you use it for decor?
Yeah.
Now, if that's helping you to have a better relationship with death because you've got a dead animal skin, not animal, but a skin and stuff, you know, I think that's an interesting concept. But again, I wouldn't want to see any animal die for decor.
Yeah. Well, and decor is another, I think, important word, because one of the things that we talked about when we were designing the show was that you didn't want sort of white gallery plinths, and so we chose to use tables to kind of thinking about that idea of decor.
I find plinths are very, they're a bit off-putting to me. It doesn't make me want to approach art when I see it on a plinth. I do like the domestic setting for the work. I think it makes it more approachable. I can understand why sometimes it is, why you need art on a plinth. Maybe it's particularly valuable and you need bulletproof glass and you need all that kind of stuff. But just this distancing, I find, just makes me uncomfortable. I was I was in New York and I was at the Met, and it's like everything, there was glass, there was plinths, there was barriers. It was like, how far away from the art am I going to be?
Do you think there's like a metaphor in there about how distant we keep ourselves from death as well?
There is, definitely, not only from death, but from thinking about our relationship with animals. It's like, because the two are connected, most people's relationship with animals is through the animal's death, through using its parts.
Well, I think speaking of death, I think it's a good time to go to our ghost birds, because it's, I think, nice to talk about the afterlife of these objects once they're dead.
These works actually came out of the resurgence of taxidermy as decor, and I just kept seeing all these birds for sale in shops on little branches and so on for the home. And I thought, they really are ghosts, because they're skins. There's no animal there, it's a skin. And the skin is like a sheath itself. It's like it's a little bird ghost. And I thought, well, I'll make flesh-like sheaths to fall over the little taxidermy birds, to emphasise the fact that they are ghosts. And if you are going to put one on your wall for decorative reasons, then you have got a little ghost.
You have. Have you ever been haunted by any of the taxidermy that you've been working on?
No, I haven't. I mean, that would be fun.
I mean, these are great candidates. Can you tell me about some of the specific birds? Because these are all 4 different kinds of birds as well.
So this little one is the most recent one. It's a duckling. And I got that duckling donated quite damaged, and so it was really important to cover it. But I thought its head still looked really not too messed up, and so I decided for the first time to use translucent PVC clay so you can see through. And if you look down, you can see it just kind of perching on there. This one is a blackbird, and this one is a quail body with hawk feet, and they too are hawk feet. And so sometimes when I'm given these birds, they're so just rotting basically, or quite often family pets have had a go at them, dogs have chewed them up, and so all that's left is the feet. And so I've just combined them there to turn them into little ghosts.
How have you found the reaction to these? Because, I mean, they're both so adorable, but also they're so creepy as well.
I found that people on the whole perhaps find these a bit more approachable, and I'm wondering if that's because they're on a wall and you can put them high up and you've actually got more distance from them.
Oh, maybe. And maybe because their eyes are covered, because there is definitely something that goes on with eyes that is very confrontational, and that's something that you've actually played with through almost all of the works in the show. Yeah.
I think the gaze is really, really important, and to think about us looking at the animal looking back at us. Taxidermic gaze is, it's really, to me, it's quite disturbing to look into glass eyes. Now, I know they're not real, but I certainly don't want to hold that gaze.
Now, this is one of your newest works that you've made, and you've made that for this show.
Yeah.
And it's combining a couple of different parts of your practice, which is the taxidermy, but also these are ceramics that you've made for the show.
Yeah. When I get taxidermy lambs donated, these are usually lambs that have died, been born too early in the spring, and somebody has decided that they will taxidermy these very small lambs, and so I have at home another one, a white one as well. And there's usually quite a lot of description around, when you talk to the person who's donated it, around gathering up hundreds of dead baby lambs that were born too early, it was cold, they died, and so they have to be gathered up and then put at the gate so that the processing plant can come and get them. And lying there, they are subjected to birds like magpies coming along and pecking their bodies if you don't go and get them quick enough. And so this work is really about the experience of having lambs born and not being protected, or being born too soon. And it's also about, I think this work is also about the position that it kind of feels like the world's in at the moment, to be honest, where, you know, there's these forces gathering, dark forces. And, you know, it's also about the hunting and the culling of magpies, which goes on. I mean, there's going to be one soon, I think, in the Wairarapa, where hundreds of magpies are shot. And to me, that's just super disturbing. And I don't know what the answer is with the overpopulations, but there has to be some other form of reducing the breeding. The twisted trees, they're dark. This is the little bit of hope here. This is the goldenness, although it looks really sickly and horrid, so maybe it's not so hopeful. There's snakes within this work. There's teeth within the work. It's kind of like the little lamb wandered in. It got trapped. It's in some kind of quicksand here. And once this magpie is finished with it, there's another one waiting.
With all of these different forms, especially the snake forms and these sort of tendrils, is that related to the Immortal piece that you've made for this one as well?
It is, and it's I quite like the tendril shape because it's kind of this reaching out and this grabbing and holding on and restricting. And I feel like, you know, in that animal relationship with humans, there is a lot about using and holding and restricting, and no, you won't roam free.
I always read this one, speaking of humans, as the magpies kind of become these stand-ins. Like if you think of fairy tales as acting as allegories, I always think of the magpies in this work, because they're kind of cast as the antagonists, but the real antagonist of all these stories is the human.
It's really difficult in New Zealand with all these animals. They didn't ask to be introduced, but they were introduced, and now they're overbred, and now they're creating problems, and possums and your magpies and a bunch of other animals. There has to be a better way of limiting their numbers.
So it's like we call it an animal problem, but this is actually coming from a human problem.
It is.
So will you ever stuff us? Because I feel like we're the ones who deserve it here.
I've had quite a few encounters with magpies. So growing up in Waipawa, we moved there when I was 7 years old, and there's quite a number of kind of groups of trees that were regular nests for the magpies. They're very, very territorial when they are breeding, and so if you walk through their territory, which can be quite wide, their territory, they're going to swoop down and attack. And so we used to walk through on the way to school, and you'd put your backpack on top of your head to stop being, because they'd dive bomb at you and peck you. Whenever I'd walk the dog that way, they'd attack the dog, and so it's like, who am I going to protect you? Yeah.
So is there a little element of self-portraiture in this? Are you the lamb?
I think our German Shepherd's the lamb.
If there's anything else that you'd like to share, Angela, otherwise I thought we'd open up to the floor for any questions.
I would like to know how your perception of death and your relation to it has changed through working with so many dead animals.
I'd say that I don't feel so distant from death, in that even coming here to talk today, one of the things I remind myself of and have done for a number of years is when I get really nervous, I think, but don't forget, you'll be dead one day. And that works a treat, because it's true. You know, you only have a certain amount of time. The close contact, you know, it makes it an everyday reality. And thinking about the dead animal, and yeah, it makes me kind of question what I feel spiritually about when I'm working with an animal. It's like I'm really, really careful with how I treat it, and I don't want to be disrespectful with its body.
Do you have any particular rituals or anything that you do with animals as a part of that process? That sounds like a very witchy question, but I more mean like in terms of sort of respecting it or coming to terms with it yourself.
So it's about keeping keeping it safe. So I don't want anything to damage it, not my cat or not anyone else. And I'm thinking about if there's an earthquake, I don't want it to like fall, and just keeping it clean and safe, and not feeding it, but just being very aware that this was once a living, breathing animal.
Well, I'd like to thank you very much, Angela. So can everyone please give Angela a round of applause for her very... So this exhibition, Second Sight, will be on until January, so I do encourage you to come back, spend some wonderful time with it, and really just get into the artworks. It's definitely something worth going deep with them and finding all the dark and beautiful and very thoughtful layers that Angela puts in. So thank you again, Angela. Cheers.